Marion Haak-Schulenburg. I'm a research assistant at the Katholische Universität Eichstätt-Ingolstadt at the master's course Community Music, Inclusive Music Pedagogy. I'm right now working on my PhD, in which I'm looking at two music projects which are working in Palestine, and I look at how they use the word music and how that impacts their practice. What I would like to give you in this video is show you my research journey and show you how I started with my idea of why I'm doing it and what I'm about to research, and then being taken by the material, by the subject matter on a road that really went differently from what I had expected, and that showed me also, especially intensely in Palestine, which is the site of my two projects, how you can come in with an idea of how it would be, and then you realize it's really quite different when you start to ask questions, when you start to engage with people, when you start to look more deeper into the realities of the project. So I wish I can inspire you to, first of all, find your own path and trust that it will guide you to your own individual original research, that you will go away with understanding the complexities of doing this kind of research that is relating practice from the field and then having a theoretical look at it. And I would want to inspire you to question how much preconceptions you have about what you're doing and how that might impact your research questions and your methodologies, and really be aware that we all come with these ideas and we already know what we want to say. And the problem is, if we are staying right there, we are going in a loop trying to prove our opinion about things. So I studied music education at the University of the Arts Berlin, and I thought I was going to be a music teacher, doing teacher training on to school. Life thought differently, and I got to know a project in Palestine, in the Palestinian territories, a music project. I was invited to take part in a volunteer program in the summer, and I was fascinated by what I experienced. I had come from wanting to go to school, and now I went to Palestine. The Barenboim Said Foundation is something that was created by Daniel Barenboim, the famous conductor, and Edward Said, equally famous as post-colonial studies initiator. And they had before founded the West Eastern Divan Orchestra, which you might know, which brings together Arabic and Israeli musicians to play in one orchestra, following an idea of coexistence that would be possible. Those two established this music school to support Palestinian society having access to music education. It's a music school that is situated in Ramallah, in the West Bank, as a quite regular music school, teaching instruments, orchestra instruments. I was fascinated by seeing these children soak up music activities with an enthusiasm and a joy that I'd never seen before. And also by seeing how people dealt with the realities of a very heavy conflict, an armed conflict between Israel and Palestine and the Palestinian territories. And I was a bit of an exotic person in that I was doing group work, choir work, and also doing a bit of training for elementary music for kindergarten teachers. It was in the lucky position to develop my own job. I came and there was nothing. And it ended up that I had started children choirs in Ramallah. I had done children choirs in about 4 villages in the West Bank, remote villages. And I had done choir work in the Balata refugee camp in Nablus. Everywhere I tried to do choir work, but as you might be able to imagine, if you're doing choir work in a place where there has never been music or singing, then you don't only do choir work. My personal idea with doing this was that I wanted these children to have a good time. That was my biggest goal. In difficult circumstances of occupation, they were to have an hour of fun and lightness and singing, good vibes. And the second thing was, of course, I would want them to be exposed to music and how fun music is, and that it would possibly become something like a resource in their life that they could use for their feeling better about things. you imagine you live in a village in the West Bank, very rural, but it's in a territory that is contested. So there are settlers who live close by who might stop you when you're on the road to school. There's military coming in at night into your village, and your house might be searched, not because there's anything bad that happened from your house or in your house, but because the soldiers need some place to practice. So people who live in these villages, they are suffering really from a lot of violence, and these children are really living a hard life. So being aware of this context and working in this context, being in touch with these children and understanding more of how their life is organized around this conflict, inside of this conflict, my perspective on doing music with them changed. So I came from this classical music background, having trained classically my voice, having learned piano at home, doing this master's in music education, coming from an idea of what a children choir would look like, maybe 2-part voice singing or 3-part voice singing. And now I'm in Palestine, and there are children who have never sung in their life, never had a teacher ask them things like warming up exercises that might seem a bit silly. They've been in a rather rigid school system with lots of stressed adults around them. Not only teachers, but also parents, and everybody is stressed out because of the circumstances. I realized that what I really wanted for those children was a different way of being, not only having one road to go, but to see an example of somebody who is doing it differently and also is an authority on what they're doing. So working in that kind of context that is so troubled made me start to think about what I was doing and also change my attitude towards what I was wanting. I was meeting a lot of people from diverse backgrounds and fields, and one of them was a friend who had studied peace studies, and she was much more in touch with post-colonial thinking, much more clear of sociological ideas. And in conversation with her, I really started to realize that what we're doing is we pretend we have a music school that works like a music school in Germany, but actually we're having a music school in Palestine where everything is different. Palestine is a place where lots of projects come. They want to do some good change there. They want to help people find different perspectives. There's lots of goodwill in there. The same idealism, but with the same lack of consciousness and awareness of the context and the historical context. So we came there with all these artistic ideas, but we came with very little understanding of how that would be best integrated in what this society needed. We came with, okay, we're doing the same thing as we do in Germany. It works in Germany. It should be working here. I thought, what a pity if I lost all this reflection. What a pity if every new project goes and does the same kind of thing that I, by that time, felt was not really giving that value that it promised to give, while spending lots of money on the ground for all the infrastructure, for all these teachers, for all the flights, for all of what you need to have such a project in place. So I felt, okay, I would really like to contribute something there. And contrary to my prior idea of never doing research again, I decided to go on research again and do a PhD. So I got in touch with my former professor in music in the University of the Arts and just had a conversation about what she thinks. Is this something that could be turned into a PhD? What would she advise me? And she encouraged me and said, yeah, go ahead, just try and write up your proposal and we'll work on it. So I started to read a lot and tried to actually grasp what my question was about. Coming from that practitioner's position to then to research on that project from a researcher's point of view was quite a task. And to find out how can I actually research and find categories and find ways of making it accessible took me quite a while. And I was reading post-colonial literature, I was looking at peace studies, I was doing sociological, music sociology reading. I looked at what projects existed apart from the ones I knew. And I made a decision to include one more project, Musicians Without Borders, a peace organization, and they're doing their peace work through music, quite a different approach. And I felt it was helpful to have the second project as a contrast to understand more about how does that idea of doing something good with music get into a project on the ground, and how does that relate? Funnily enough, I now work for Musicians Without Borders, which means that I picked two projects which are very, very close to my personal biography. This is quite a positionality to have. I needed to deal with that. One more important point in my research was that I had a mentor, and she introduced me to the ideas of Christopher Small. Felicity Lawrence lives in England, and she is a university lecturer as well. And she really encouraged me and said, yeah, you have enough material on your hand, you have so much experience, and you have really an interesting perspective to offer. And I needed that encouragement because for quite a while I was kind of swimming in the sea of unclarity and knowing that I want to do something, but I just couldn't pinpoint how to frame it. So reading Christopher Small and getting into this idea of ideal relationships being built in the Music King, that really gave me an access to look more critically and analytically at those two projects to see, okay, what kind of relationships do they build? What kind of music do they use? What do people actually think of those projects on the ground? What are they doing with it? Because I have my own ideas and my sociological thinking and now post-colonial thinking, but what if that is all just off what people are really experiencing? So I decided I'm gonna do some field work in Palestine. I'm gonna interview people who are in the project, and I would be interviewing participants, I would be interviewing staff and teachers. So these were my three groups that I wanted to learn from how their perspective is. So I had all these great interviews. I'm really still very proud of what I got. By that time I had become pregnant, and I had only very few time between coming back from Israel and actually giving birth to my first son, which meant that I was not able to do the transcription of all of this interview material. And by the time I got back to my PhD project, something had sunk down and developed, and I had turned my thinking onto a slightly different focus. I had come across two very important works. One is a book written by a German professor of arts education. Her name is Yvonne Ehrenspeck, and she wrote a book in which she detailed the development of tradition that brought about the idea that aesthetics can actually help you educate people, make them a better human. So she started laying out the philosophy of Immanuel Kant and how arts are autonomous, going to Friedrich Schiller, and how he made it something that you can use to morally better people. And then on towards the present time, where we're still going on that narrative that if you do music or arts with people, that they will get better by it. And I recognized that this is something that I had seen in the post-colonial writing, something that runs through and has a long history. And it made me so much more aware of somehow the lineage in which this project stands, the Barenboim Said project. And it gave me an access which was much more theoretical, and by that much more analytical. So I made that transition from my opinionated practitioner's perspective into being able to see how and why this project formed itself as it did, relying on that idea that arts will make a difference, music will make a difference, and that classical music will make that difference for those people. And you can use it in order to try to bring people together, to reconcile and to bring peace. The other was an essay, or is an essay by Rubén Gastambide Fernández, who wrote a piece called Why the Arts Don't Do Anything. And it's basically an analysis of how discursively the arts are used as a construct that will benefit one group and not benefit another. Using the arts discursively means that you are saying the arts, but you're not saying what you mean by the arts. And then because there are people who are in the position to define what the arts are, you can define who's artistic and who isn't, and you can define who's in the club and who isn't. And so you're in this sociological realm, you're looking at exclusion and inclusion, and you're looking at how the arts have been instrumental in colonialism as a humanistic ideal that would be brought to the wilds and that would morally better them. And so to connect these two works kind of gave me access to what might be happening in the project I was looking at. And I look particularly now at the way the term music is used in both projects, in the Barenboim Said Foundation Music School and Musicians Without Borders project. So from starting to struggle with these theoretical texts, I really had an access to analyzing the way music was used as a term in those two projects. So now, instead of doing the transcriptions of the interviews, I started to analyze the sources, to analyze what kind of history of tradition they come from, what idea of music they have, and how that impacts how those projects are actually formed. In the Barenboim Said Foundation, you can say that music is a generalization that is actually standing for classical Western music. They're talking music is a tool that helps to do this and that, but what they mean is Western classical music is a tool that will help you do this and that. If you start to realize that this is what they mean, then you can have a different analytical understanding of the implications that this music concept brings. Then if you claim that this project will do all of those things, is that really the thing that we need in a place like Palestine? Is that really going to work? If we don't want it like that, what do we need to add? What do we need to integrate in order to make it work? You know, if your values are not that you want to be kind of in a post-colonial or a colonial mindset and bring the good things to people, then what would you have to change? And equally for my other project, Musicians Without Borders project, I realized, okay, they stand in a different tradition. They come from activism. They are a peace organization and they're doing community music. The founder of Musicians Without Borders, Laura Hassler, and she grew up in a community of human rights activists, an amazing community that was going for social justice. So I realized the extent to which the two founders of each project gave their imprint on these projects, but also how these concepts of music were standing in a particular lineage with a particular philosophy in their back. I still find that fascinating to get this wider frame and perspective and to realize that these two projects give an example of how that looks on the ground. And then we can start to ask questions. If our goal is to help people find their peace in themselves, with others, which kind of approach is helpful? How does it have to be done in order not to be with a colonial mindset? And this has to be asked for both projects. Also, a community music project needs to ask, do we have aspects of a colonial mindset with us? There's a lot of things to consider, and it's really worthwhile doing it. It's really worthwhile diving deep. It's worthwhile taking your time, because what you get out is an insight that is so much deeper and so much more rich than what you would get from the supposedly more easy way. Having said what I said, you can get that my research journey was not like a straight line from this is what I want to know and this is how I do it and now we know. My own personal why was very strong, why I wanted to do it. I really wanted to understand something there, really wanted to contribute something, and it was quite a rocky journey, and I had many points in which I felt I'm really lost in all this territory, all these fields. I cannot research post-colonial studies, peace studies, sociology of music, all of these things and integrate them into one thing. So it has been quite a road, and I'm very grateful for it. And from my personal view, it's really something to have the courage to do, to follow what you need to do in order to get to what you want to do, what you want to contribute.